So we talked a lot about chemistry and biology and FDA and IND enabling and sort of traditional matters, scientific matters. And this session is a little bit different. It's really a commercialization strategy, developing science into products. And actually, over the 6 or 7 years that we've been doing this conference, this session in particular has actually gained has gained a lot of interest for a couple of reasons. One is that it's often material that people haven't heard before, but more importantly, it's information and strategies and so on that make it that are critical to taking the science and actually getting the kind of funding that one needs to commercialize a drug, to license something to a pharma company, to create your own biotech company, and these sorts of issues. And we really have a great panel for you today. So I'm just going to quickly turn it right over to Abram, who's going to talk to us about tech transfer and intellectual property management.
Okay, well, thanks, Howard. So I'm going to talk about the tech transfer process from a university perspective. So the mission of the tech transfer process, or offices like ours, is to promote the commercial development of university technologies from research projects into actual products that can benefit patients and improve society, while at the same time providing a return back to the university that gets plowed back into further research. Is the microphone on? Okay. Okay. So the activity really took off in the early 1980s with the passage of the Bayh-Dole Act by Congress, which changed the law so that universities could own rights to inventions that came out of federal funding. So with that really led to many universities starting or expanding tech transfer programs. Generally, this is governed by a patent policy at the university, so that inventions made by faculty and students in the course of their research and other activities there is owned by the university, and the university invests in the patenting process and commercialization process. And then whatever comes out of that, the faculty or other inventors share in the returns from that, so that gives a significant incentive, in addition to, of course, the main incentive of wanting to see your research translated into actual products to benefit people. And so it's really taken off significantly since then. It's a long-term process from basic research to initial discovery all the way until products come to market, and can take many years. So in terms of some of the projects we've had at NYU, some of our more successful ones have wound up taking 14 to 15 years from the time we signed agreements with industry till the time products actually came to market. But overall, it has had a very beneficial effect, with many hundreds of products now getting into thousands having come out of university-based research since the passage of the law. And at NYU, we've been fortunate to have 24 biomedical products come to market addressing a range of diseases. Our two most successful pharmaceuticals are the drugs Remicade and Sutent, as well as many medical devices and many diagnostics as well. And we also have 13 products currently in clinical trials addressing a range of diseases. So it has been beneficial in again, translating this into actual products. So in terms of the process, it starts when faculty come to our office with an invention. And in terms of what's an invention, it could be a potential pharmaceutical, diagnostic, medical device. In other cases, it's more just you've discovered a new mechanism, so it's not often that faculty come to our office with a drug in a bottle ready for us to take and commercialize, but it might be discovering a new mechanism for how disease works and developing assays and models associated with that. But then by extrapolating from that a bit, you can think about how that would lead to ultimate therapeutics or diagnostics. So it's important, even if you've never thought about the work you're doing as being potentially commercial, extrapolate a little bit, in terms of what the importance of it is and how it can ultimately lead to products. So once we get inventions at our office, we evaluate them to see if they're patentable and if they have commercial potential. And if they do, we'll go ahead and file patent applications on them. So patents are critical in the pharmaceutical industry because of the very long timelines and expense of bringing a product to market. That only makes sense if there'll be exclusivity at the end of the day for a company to recoup its investment. So a key thing to be aware of is under the patent laws, it's important that a patent application be filed prior to the first public disclosure of an invention. And a public disclosure could mean even an abstract or talking at a meeting, in addition to, of course, a full paper. So there's not, though, any antagonism between publishing and patenting. The key is just go to your tech transfer office early in the process, and we can file patents very quickly around the researcher schedule, so that again there's no need to delay publication. Just it's very important though to make sure the patents get filed early. So once we file the patent, we then go out and try to find a commercial partner to develop the product. And we'll work with the faculty member to identify companies that are potential good partners. We have many relationships with industry in our office, but also the faculty members often do as well. So it's important if you're doing research that it's a collaborative process between the researcher and the tech transfer office, that they should be on the same page to make sure that a good strategy is followed and companies are identified. So it's been a trend for a long time that often it hasn't been the larger companies that have taken it directly out of the university, but oftentimes it's smaller companies or startup companies that we wind up working with initially because of an ability to take greater risk. And then down the road, if the project is successful and gets into clinical trials, then oftentimes they'll partner with or be acquired by a larger company. So in the two examples I mentioned before, we started with Centocor when they were a small biotech company, and then Sutent was a startup out of NYU and the Max Planck Institute, and then ultimately they got acquired by Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer as they got further developed. So that's been a trend for a long time. In recent years, we found it even more challenging that even some venture capital firms and other traditional early funders have wanted to see things a bit later stage than what a university, the stage that a university technology is typically at. So we've had to be a little more creative in trying to bridge the gap and get it to the point where you can raise significant funding. So a couple of the things we've done at NYU, one is we've created what's called an Applied Research Support Fund, which provides funding of about $75,000 a project to do key proof of principle studies or sometimes making prototypes of devices. And it's been reasonably successful. Over the years, we've put about $2.8 million into it and generated about $28 million in subsequent licensing of the technologies that we had funded. And the program's grown in recent years as the need has evolved. And in the most recent year, we funded 8 projects, 3 of them in the neurosciences, as well as oncology and inflammatory diseases and several other areas. Also, within the New York City environment here, there are a couple of other programs stepping up. The New York City Investment Fund started something called the BioAccelerate program, which provides $250,000 per project for projects with potential and matches researchers with entrepreneurs to be advisors to them. And so that's been a very effective program as well. Other sources of funding, when we start companies, they're able to get SBIR funding, and also, as will be discussed later, foundation funding is often very helpful. So we try to be creative and put together funding from a variety of sources to, again, help bridge that gap and bring projects forward. And then most recently, something we did just last year is we've now created an internal venture capital fund at our university that can provide funding of $250,000 to $500,000 per project in conjunction with other funding sources coming in. So we try to leverage that investment to show our commitment to the technology, and again, try to do what we can to bridge the gap. So once we get a company interested in it, ultimately, we negotiate a license agreement with them. And our philosophy has been to try to develop win-win agreements where we all benefit in the long term if the product is successful. So generally, we've stressed taking equity in startup companies and royalties on products if the product actually comes to market, rather than large upfront license fees. And it's served us well in terms of the revenue we've ultimately generated. But by taking that kind of approach, it works better for small companies that they could put all their resources into actual development rather than paying the university a fee. So we try to be very flexible in working things out. One of the key areas in a license agreement, besides the financials, is diligence provision. So the thing we're most concerned about is that the company will continue to develop the technology. So oftentimes in the early stages that might involve funding research in the inventor's lab, where that's the most appropriate place to put the funding. And then as the technology and the product develops, it gets translated more towards industry where things can be done like medicinal chemistry and toxicology and actual drug development. And certainly once you get to clinical trials, bringing it into the clinic. In the cases of startup companies, we do have to manage conflicts of interest associated with that. And so we do take a hard look at any involvement in the clinical development of our actual clinical testing of our products. And usually we don't get involved with that, but we're very involved in the early stage drug discovery process and moving it into actual product development. And then once we get an agreement signed, we also, again, have to be flexible that there are ups and downs in the process. As I mentioned, our most successful drugs, took almost 15 years, and there were ups and downs, and times when funding was in question, and times when, there were certain setbacks. So we will renegotiate the agreements as necessary, as long as the company is staying focused and is capable of developing the drug. We'll adjust timelines as necessary. We're not looking to pull it back. We're looking to work together with companies to make it a success. So I think that's sort of an overview, and I'm happy to take questions on it. And I think, again, some key things to remember are just that, first of all, patenting early is important to make sure you reserve rights. And then it's essentially a partnership between multiple parties, and you need to work together over the long term. So.
We're going to hold questions to the end so that each of the panelists has a chance to speak. So please remember your questions so that we can hear them later.
Great. So my name's Jeff Smith. I am the co-founder and managing partner at Ascent Biomedical Ventures, which is a seed and early stage focused venture fund based here in New York City. About a third of the companies in our portfolio are companies that we started from scratch in collaboration with somebody out of an academic environment. I'm also the founder and director of the Science and Economics program at Rockefeller University, so I have a little bit of a foot in the academic world as well. And so having a job in venture capital, I'm often exposed to a lot of the misconceptions people have about what being a venture capitalist is or what venture capital is. So I thought I'd begin the discussion by giving you a couple different points of view on what venture capital is about. So here, according to venture capitalists themselves, these are some taglines of prominent venture capitalists about what their firms are about. So they are, quote, transforming healthcare through innovation. They're, quote, pioneers in life sciences. They, quote, are making a difference in the life sciences. Or, quote, building companies that shape the future. So, according to ourselves, we're kind of this heroic group out there, innovating in the economy. But as I hope my comments will convince you, venture capital really isn't all that much about innovation. So here's another definition. Here the definition begins. Venture capital firms are professional institutional managers of risk capital that enables and supports the most innovative and promising companies. Big on innovation. Definition continues. This money funds new ideas that could not be financed with traditional bank financing, so you can't go take out a loan from your bank. that threaten established products and services in a corporation, so we're disruptive, and that typically take 5 or 8 years to be launched. So that definition is brought to you by the National Venture Capital Association. This is the trade and lobbying group on behalf of venture capital as an industry. And it's not a bad definition, but there's still a lot of this notion of innovation and threatening and disruption. And I'll let you know a secret. Despite all this hype about being the driver of innovation and all these other things, venture capital is really pretty simple. It's just an asset class, right? So there are lots of different kinds of asset classes. Cash is an asset class. Debt, bonds are an asset class. Stock, equity, that's an asset class. And then there's this big pool of alternative investments that are put into an asset class. And that includes real estate, foreign currency, natural resources, all different types of things, and it includes venture capital. And so my job as a venture capitalist really is to sit inside the asset allocation of somebody with a lot of money. Could be a university endowment, could be a pension fund, could be a family with a lot of money. But they're going to take their money and they're going to spread it out around these different asset classes and try to balance out their risk and return over time. And our job as venture capitalists is to sit at the riskier end of that scale and hopefully provide, more return than you might get out of keeping cash in your bank account, which today doesn't really get you too much of a return, or more of a return than you might get in the public stock market. And at the end of the day, that's all venture capital is. So we answer to our master, that is the groups that have given us the money, the pension funds or the endowments and what have you. And we have to go about figuring out how to create this high return. And so innovation is really kind of a byproduct of that, because in theory, to find these high returns in the market, you have to go do things that are a little bit off the beaten track, perhaps a little bit innovative. But it starts with that need to produce that return in that asset allocation. It doesn't really start with innovation per se. So how big an asset class is venture capital? In the United States, there are approximately 740 independent venture firms, not that many. We have roughly $250 billion under management. Now, in most measures, $250 billion seems like kind of a lot of money. But compared to the US bond market, which is a $30+ trillion market, or the US public equity markets, which are over $10 trillion, $250 billion compared to 30 or 40 trillion is actually not that big a number. And so then when you actually look at the amount of money that we invest, so we may have all that $250 billion under management, but the amount that we actually put to work in any given year, in 2009, which obviously wasn't a great year for us coming out of the financial crisis, we only invested about $20 billion in about 3,000 companies. That's the entire venture capital industry. Put out about $20 billion into about 3,000 companies. In 2010, we got a little more aggressive. We put out about $23 billion into about 3,500 companies. And last year, we put out about $28 billion into about 3,400 companies. That's it in the United States. It's actually a really small amount of activity if you think about it. Of that investment, so if that's your total pie, seed and early venture capital in each of the years was about a third. So you were talking $6, $7, $9 billion in those years, and you were talking roughly 1,500 companies. So less than 10 billion into about 1,500 companies was in that seed or early category. So of that big number, how much of that went into biotechnology? Again, it's been fairly consistent. It's been around 16, 17%, so $3.5 to $4 billion over the last few years per year into about 450 companies. So 4 billion into 450 companies. That's been the total biotechnology venture capital activity. Again, compared that to the NIH budget of $30 billion a year, we're pretty small. Look at CNS drug sales. Total 2010 CNS drug sales were about 80 billion worldwide, of which about 5.5 billion was for cognitive disorders or dementias. So we're actually putting less venture capital into biotechnology each year than drugs, of which there aren't very many, that are being sold for cognitive disorders and dementia. So how about CNS? I actually couldn't find numbers for neurodegeneration, but for CNS as a category, and the numbers may not be perfect, but the numbers I were able to find showed 2009, there were 5 venture investments in CNS. 2010 there were 6, 2011 there were 6. So that's about 1% of the amount of biotech money going into CNS, or 0.1%, 0.15% of the total. Right? So our sum total activities in this area are really pretty small. If each of those companies that got financed in CNS got the average investment amount, our total number of VC dollars into CNS each year for the past few years would have been about $40 million. I mean, it's laughably small, which is why the focus on venture capital as being this big heroic driver of the innovation economy is really out of proportion to the amount of assets that we're really putting to work. And so this room obviously understands that there's an incredible unmet need in the area of neurodegeneration and CNS drugs. So why is it that we are so reluctant to put money to work? Why is our investment so small in these areas? And there are really 4 problems that we're dealing with as venture capitalists when we put money to work, and they're all different forms of uncertainty. So the first form of uncertainty is about the science or the technology that we're investing in. So innovation is risky and it is uncertain. And part of what that means for us is that there's a range of possible outcomes for a given idea or a given type of technology. And the range for drugs increasingly has been a binary range, meaning we either do a clinical trial and get some good results, or we don't. If we don't, we're done and we lose our money. If we do, we don't necessarily get to the pot at the end of the rainbow, but at least we can probably finance the company and continue to move forward. So in the drug area, you're in a difficult area around mitigating risk, but we try as best we can. So what do? We look for well-understood mechanisms of action, thinking that will reduce risk. We look for proof of principle, so we look at your data and hopefully convince ourselves that you've proved your hypothesis, and that's going to reduce risk. And we certainly look for experience management, because in theory we think that's going to reduce risk as well. The outcome of our investments can hinge on different things at different points in time. So early on, our ability to get more money into a company may hinge on showing proof of concept in animals. As we move along, if we want to convince Merck to work with us, it may require that we've shown proof of concept in humans. And then ultimately, you want to get FDA approval so you can get out onto the market. But in trying to mitigate the fact that different stages have different risks associated with them, we try to start with really big markets, because we figure even if we don't quite hit our mark, at least the market's huge. So even if we're not perfect, there's still big markets, and maybe we'll get some kind of return. We obviously look for unmet clinical needs. It's not a very good time to be chasing Me Too opportunities, given the reimbursement issues in the country today. Regulatory strategies are obviously critical. It's where the bulk of the dollars and the bulk of the time gets taken up. So do you have a very clear regulatory strategy, clear clinical endpoints, things that are going to be easy to work with the FDA on? And finally, what is the likelihood that you're going to be able to partner, and when are you going to be able to partner? So do the big companies have an interest in your area? Do they have pre-existing programs? How many of them have programs? And are you going to be able to get a partner, and at what stage? So obviously in these things are a bunch of milestones along the way, getting your proof in animals, getting your proof in humans, et cetera. And so we're big on milestones. We want to start out with this is a great venture capital line. We say to our people come in, look, we just want to make sure your valuation expectations are in line with the market, which of course means we're going to give you almost nothing for your company, but don't worry, because at least we'll put some money in. You have to play in the market, and the market for early companies has not been very robust, so valuations are low, and that's just something that we all have to deal with. Moreover, not only are we going to say, gee, your valuation's going to be low, but we're not going to give you all the money up front. We're going to use a fancy word, tranche. We're going to put the money in stages. So we're going to give you a little bit of money and hope that you hit a milestone. If you hit that milestone, we'll give you a little bit more money and a little bit more money. When I first started doing venture capital, a tranched deal were 2 stages. You got the first half of the money, and then you got the second half of the money. You're seeing deals in the market today where there can be upwards of 6 tranches. So great, you've raised $30 million, but you're going to get it in 6 $5 million pieces along the way. And again, that's all about venture capitalists trying to mitigate or control risk. So the next type of uncertainty that we have to deal with is uncertainty about our own knowledge, gaps in our information. So there's a lot of stuff that you may know as an entrepreneur, and we may not know. Or we may think we know, but as we spend more time on it, maybe we get less sure of ourselves. And that's what the due diligence process is about. It's about closing the information gap between what the company founders and experts in the field know versus what we as investors know. And that can be an incredibly time-consuming process, of course. The second thing that we do to try to deal with these information gaps is to put in place deal terms. These are all the things that we negotiate via lawyers. So there's a whole list of what are called protective provisions. These are contractual provisions that give us a right to control certain things in the company. And we have them there because there's just lots of stuff that we don't know. So even if we've spent 6 months doing due diligence on your company, we're still uncomfortable that there's lots of stuff we don't know. And so we put in all sorts of governance provisions and protective provisions. We make you vest your stock over a long period of time to make sure you're going to stay around, to follow through. All of that is to help deal with this information uncertainty. The third category is uncertainty about the type of assets that we invest in, which are soft assets. We tend not to be investing in big factories where you can go kick the tires and say, there's the factory, there's the machine. We're investing in people, in scientists. We're investing in patents, typically, which are just applications, not having been issued yet. These things are hard to set a value on, and they're hard to secure. You know, it's that thing about an elevator company. At the end of the day, all your assets get on the elevator and go down and go home. That's hard for us to deal with. And so again, a lot of what happens in setting the deal terms between a venture capitalist and a company is dealing with these soft assets and the uncertainties around them. And the fourth and final uncertainty is about the market. So we invest today, but these are long-term projects. And you know this better than I, science is a long-term game. So we actually have no idea what things are going to look like 5 or 7 years hence when we're trying to get a return on our investment. And so again, we put all kinds of things into these agreements to attempt to protect us over the span of our involvement or over the time that our money is going to be sitting in that investment. And lots of things can happen. And better technology can come along and knock you out of the box. Big pharma can change its focus, and you went from a potential buyer universe of 5 down to 3 or 2, and that can dramatically impact our potential exit. These, again, are the types of uncertainties that drive a lot of what we as venture capitalists do. It's why venture capital is not cheap money. It's very expensive. It comes with lots of strings attached to it. And they're all around this notion of providing the venture capitalist some control, or what I found is really just the illusion of some control over managing these investments out over time. So obviously for CNS drugs, that's tough. You know, CNS drugs overall have a lower success rate. They take longer to develop. They have all the challenges that you know far more about than I do in terms of the complexity of the brain and low predictability of animal models translating into human results. The clinical trials tend to have to be long because these are slow-moving diseases. They have high placebo rates, we need big groups, and that's expensive. All of the uncertainty plays right into the myths of venture capital, which is that we actually aren't about wanting to take risk. We aren't about getting out and being like these heroic leaders. We actually want to take as little risk as we can. We would prefer to be fast followers and have somebody else clear the path in front of us. And so it's important to understand that venture capital is a tool. It's appropriate in certain situations, but not in all situations. And so that's why Abram's point about there being other sources of capital that you need to focus on is really, really important. To get focused on venture capital, given the small number of dollars and our pretty risk-averse point of view of the world, means that you have to take advantage of these other types of financings, certainly until you get far enough down the road that you've really begun to prove out some of your key milestones. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Susan Rohrer, and I work at the Merck Pharmaceutical Company. We are a global healthcare company with operations around the world in 140 companies. I have been with Merck for over 24 years. I'm a trained basic research scientist with a PhD in biology and biochemistry. And I went to Merck some 24 years ago to do drug discovery and drug development work. And I stayed in the research labs for 17 years doing just that. And decided 7 years ago to make a career path change. And I joined the licensing group at Merck at that time. So my job now for Merck is to go out and meet with people like yourselves in order to identify for Merck new collaboration partners, new licensing partners, new opportunities to expand our own portfolio by bringing new partners into the fold. We have a large number of people who work as part of our organization focused on the front end of licensing, which is the search and find new partners and conduct the early scientific assessment of opportunities. We have people like myself who are scouting for new partners located all around the world. We have a network of individuals who are subject matter experts who will focus on neuroscience or oncology or cardiovascular disease and will collaborate with me to select through the many opportunities that we are finding out there. I thought it would be interesting to comment on my relationships with other people in the ecosystem, and representatives of those kinds of individuals are sitting here at the table with me. I actually spend quite a lot of my time visiting with people in the University Tech transfer offices in the territory that I cover. So the people on Abrams' staff are very familiar to me. I visit with them on occasion. I talk to them frequently about invention disclosures that are coming to them from their faculty, and I explain to them what the Merck priorities for licensing look like at any given point in time. And basically what we're trying to do is help each other make good matches between inventors at NYU and the scientists at Merck who are looking to establish more partnerships. I also work very actively with people in the venture capital community. In some respects, the venture capital investors are one of our closest collaborators, and that is because they are out there investing in startup companies and building portfolios of companies that, while perhaps too early for Merck to invest directly in, will ultimately become partners of Merck. And so I establish relationships with venture capital groups throughout my territory and visit with them on occasion. The relationship goes two ways. So while they are sharing with me information about investments that they have decided to make and companies that they are bringing along, I'm also sharing with them information about the Merck priority areas, and within those priority areas, the molecular approaches that we think have highest probability of success. And it's possible that over time that may influence some of their thinking and some of their investment choices. But we really see each other as partners in this bigger ecosystem. I spend a huge amount of my time meeting with people who represent biotech companies. So I'm familiar with the hundreds of biotech companies that are in my territory, and I try to keep tabs on the programs that are under development at those companies and to check in with the CEOs and chief scientific officers of those companies on a regular basis to find out whether their programs have moved along to a stage at which it might become likely that Merck would want to enter into a formal relationship with the company. And last but certainly not least are the disease area foundations like the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation and the Michael J. Fox Foundation. Both of those groups are important partners of mine as well for a couple of reasons. One is that both of those groups and many other disease area foundations are doing so much right now in terms of funding early translational stage research in their chosen areas. And what that means for me is that it's a place that I can go to see a lot of new emerging science that's likely to be of interest to Merck for licensing, perhaps a couple of years down the road. So with the infrastructure that organizations like that have in place to select groups that will be funded by their organizations, it really serves as a very productive kind of filtering mechanism for me to see the emerging science that's more likely to be aligned with Merck's interests. The other way in which we work with some of the disease area foundations is to collaborate with them in some of these pre-competitive consortia kinds of activities where we all agree together, multiple pharmaceutical companies and the disease area foundations and sometimes a government agency, agree that there is value in partnering in order to solve big problems that will enable the entire field to move forward. And we have a couple of those kinds of partnerships, one with the Michael J. Fox Foundation, one in which the ADDF is involved, that we believe will play an important role in enabling better, faster drug development in the Alzheimer's and Parkinson's areas. I'm going to stop there and hope that we have plenty of time for questions and answers, because I'm sure you all have lots of questions for all of us about how to do what you're trying to do better.
So I'm Frank Longo, and I guess my role in the panel is to share from the perspective of just a faculty investigator the experience of starting a virtual company and taking you through kind of the adventure that we had. I'll make it generic, hopefully to apply to as many people as possible here who have thoughts of starting a company or why would want to do it. Basically, I was at UCSF and then University of North Carolina. I'm at Stanford now. But while I was at UCSF and UNC, our group developed collections of small molecules targeting various neurotrophin receptors, and we founded a company based on that. And so I won't show too many slides here, but I just want to illustrate some points that my colleagues are making, but from the other side of the fence of an investigator, basically. And so I'll only show one technology slide, but basically the neurotrophin factor receptors, P75 is the neurotrophin factor receptor, and we felt that many of its signaling mechanisms overlapped the signaling mechanisms that are aberrant in Alzheimer's disease. And we thought if we could create small molecule ligands for that neurotrophin receptor, it would counteract many of the deleterious signaling processes that occur in Alzheimer's. And that's what we proceeded to do, create a first-in-class set of small molecules for this receptor, and that's basically our technology. So I won't spend much time on the science. So once one is at a point where you